I don't know about y'all, but I was conducting quarterly profit meetings for my entrepreneurial endeavors in the first grade. In one of my recent videos, I briefly touched on the topic of entrepreneurialism and neurodivergence, and while I may not actually have been conducting quarterly profit meetings in elementary school, my startup ventures really do go back that far. In this video, I wanted to go more in depth into why neurodivergent people gravitate towards business startups, give some advice for those of you who would like to start up your own business, and finally, I thought it would be fun to tell you about all of my businesses dating back to that famous rock selling racket I had going on before I even knew my times tables. So even if this isn't your cup of tea, you can stick around for story time at the end and allow me to entertain you with all of my money-making schemes. I'll also be including the uniqueness of having both autism and ADHD for those of us who choose this career path. So first, let's get into some facts and statistics into how neurodivergence correlates with entrepreneurialism. To start with, 29% of entrepreneurs have ADHD. An article in DIYgenius.com had this to say about the connection. Characteristics of ADHD, such as divergent thinking, flexibility of thought, and perceptual curiosity, make people with ADHD excellent entrepreneurs if they can learn to focus on the right things and remove their distraction kryptonite. ADHD is also associated with risk-taking behavior, high energy, and the ability to multitask and switch between tasks quickly, which can be beneficial for managing multiple projects and responsibilities. Famous entrepreneurs with ADHD include Richard Branson, Charles Schwab, and Tim Ferriss. In my introductory video, I talked about how people with ADHD are 3 times more likely to start their own businesses, but in reality, this figure probably comes from the approximation that 1 in 3 entrepreneurs self-report having this diagnosis. If we expanded that outward to compare it to the general population, they're actually 500% more likely to be business owners when compared to neurotypicals. That's a pretty staggering statistic if you ask me. It goes on to say that people with dyslexia are 230% more likely to be entrepreneurs and include famous people like Steve Jobs, Walt Disney, and Henry Ford. And as you might have guessed, there are a lot of famous entrepreneurs diagnosed or suspected to have had autism, like Nikola Tesla, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk. In the off chance you've stumbled upon this video and you're new to learning about neurodivergence, I'll clarify that you'll likely see this referred to as Asperger's in most literature. However, the DSM-5 now categorizes everything under the autism umbrella. I realize most of my viewers know that, but there might be some that don't, so I just wanted to eliminate any confusion there. As we go through these stats, one should keep in mind that a lot of these figures might be even higher, as there are likely many more undiagnosed adults out there. Anyway, each of these forms of neurodivergence have special traits that make them unique, and some would even say gifted in the entrepreneurial arena. People with dyslexia think visually, have increased spatial reasoning, and great imaginations. Those with ADHD have a higher risk appetite, creativity, high energy, and are able to think on their feet. They can jump right in, be decisive, and can shine in times of crisis. People with autism have a high attention to detail, an interest in systems, pattern recognition, and are less likely to bow to social norms. They might have good mathematical or technical abilities, strong memory, and they often have character strengths like honesty and loyalty. And as we all know, both autism and ADHD have the gift of hyper-focusing on things they're passionate about. On an unrelated note, I honestly think that the majority of autistic creators on YouTube might also have ADHD as well, but that's just my suspicion. Anyway, all of these forms of neurodivergence carry outside-of-the-box thinking, as well as creative or complex problem-solving skills. Neurodivergent people really do have unique traits that can't really be replicated in the general population. However, there are a lot of challenges with neurodivergence as well. Executive dysfunction is probably one of the greatest ones. People with dyslexia have challenges with reading, writing, and learning comprehension. Those with ADHD struggle with impulsiveness, disorganization, and have problems prioritizing. They often have poor planning and time management and problems focusing on a task, especially if it's not a preferred activity. And last but not least, autistics struggle with communication and social interaction, rigid patterns of behavior, and restricted interests. For those of you who have both autism and ADHD like me, you'll find that your strengths might overcome your deficits in some areas, while also presenting deficits that probably wouldn't otherwise be there if you only had one or the other. A few personal examples of this are as follows. For one of the strengths of ADHD is that they may not get hung up on decision making and are more decisive, meaning things move along. But because I also have autism, I do get hung up on decision making, which sometimes results in total inaction. I had great difficulty with delegation, and my perfectionism meant that a task that should only take like 1 hour could take me a whole month. It would sometimes take me so long to get a task done that it was no longer relevant by the time of completion. But on the flip side, my autism gave me pretty exceptional organizational skills that I probably wouldn't have had if I just had ADHD. My autistic need for sameness can make me less likely to explore new ways of doing things that might be more efficient. But my ADHD makes me more flexible than if I had just autism alone. And the rule following and honesty aspect of autism made me trustworthy with tens of thousands of client dollars, down to the penny. All in all, my biggest challenges were my social deficits. ADHDers are more likely to be extroverted and outgoing, but my social challenges and communication difficulties meant I was absolutely horrible, or rubbish, as my friends across the pond would say, at networking and promoting my business. ADHDers are able to draw in lots of clients, whereas I tend to employ a build it and they will come mentality. I was able to grow my last business big enough all by myself to require hiring 2 full-time employees so that I could simply focus on marketing and growing it. But as you might have guessed, that did not go well. I felt like I could just force myself to overcome my introvertedness with enough willpower, but I couldn't, and my business stagnated. I have tons of marketing knowledge and intuition, but all of that is meaningless if you can't pick up the phone or have engaging conversation. There was no amount of willpower in the world that could make me a charismatic and outgoing person. So I had my first ever breakdown around 2019 and had to take a step back. I eventually wound up selling my business in 2021. Now, I could look at that as a failure, or I could look at it as a success. Sure, my neurodivergent difficulties ultimately broke me and brought me to a point where I couldn't do it anymore. But I ran a successful business for over a decade, hired several part-time and full-time employees during that time, and changed the lives of people all around the world in a tangible way. I had to work twice as hard to overcome some of my deficits to achieve what I achieved, and many neurodivergent people can strongly relate to this. I encourage those of you who are listening to this right now to remember that you've had to paddle twice as hard as the other ducks to move the same distance. And because of that, I think there's a lot to be said about the amount of strengths and perseverance we have, because life is set on hard mode for us. So what draws neurodivergents into wanting to start their own businesses to begin with? Well, part of it stems from a desire to make accommodations for ourselves. For those of us who were later diagnosed, we were probably meeting our needs in a way that we likely didn't even realize were accommodations at the time. I remember begging my managers at my last office job to let me work from home before working from home was cool, because I just couldn't function in that environment. The social atmosphere had my self-esteem at an all-time low. There were noises, constant distractions, and fluorescent lighting, all of which added to my distress, not to mention the draining lunches and after-hour social gatherings. Of course, my managers told me I couldn't work from home, but back then, I knew I struggled terribly in that environment and desperately wanted out of it so I could just focus on my job, but I didn't know why. My position ended up moving out of state, and rather than moving with it, I took my severance and became my own boss. Getting out of the social environment of the conventional workplace suits many of us. We get that coveted opportunity to focus on our interests and set our own schedules. We get to tailor our physical work environment to include less sensory assault and less distractions. We're able to free ourselves from social and corporate constraints that squash our creativity and valuable contributions. This enables us to tailor our work output into something that fits into our lives, rather than trying to fit into a neurotypical box. Some neurodivergents have actually been referred to as accidental entrepreneurs because that's just what they become after they weren't able to manage in the traditional workplace. Some statistics conclude that 30 to 40% of neurodivergents are unemployed. Thus, they find themselves in a position where they have no other choice but to find other ways of supporting themselves. Granted, that excludes them from the unemployment statistics, but the reason behind that statistic is part of what pushes so many into self-employment in the first place. We get told our whole lives that we're bright, but we're lazy or just not applying ourselves. Then we discover that it's because we've been trying to do things the neurotypical way this whole time, which doesn't work with how our brains are wired. We realize we can traverse our own paths and find out we aren't as broken as we thought. Basically, we foster our own environment, which allows us to utilize and magnify our strengths instead of feeling beat down because what we thought were deficits were actually just differences. Now, none of this is to say that becoming your own boss is the only way to be happy in your career path. There are many employers out there who foster neurodivergent friendly workspaces, and now that more of us are working from home, we get many of the benefits I just mentioned without having to take that risky entrepreneurial leap. I'm also not saying we're special little snowflakes that neurotypicals will never live up to, or that the neurotypical way of life is bad. The truth is, we need each other to move society forward. We each have strengths and weaknesses that complement each other and can come together to form a beautiful picture. We just need to stop viewing one way of thinking or processing as the right way or the only way. And finally, this also isn't intended to be a stab at ableism. No one's value is determined by how successful they are in a business. I'm just sharing all of this to show that we can overcome our weaknesses and focus on our strengths in whatever manner is meaningful for us. That may or may not be in a business startup, but only you get to determine what meaningful looks like for you. But if business startup does sound appealing to you, I'll share a few tips that I've identified to help you get the juices flowing. And after this, we'll get into story time about all of Jennifer's fantastical business adventures. So the tips I'm about to provide certainly aren't exhaustive or things that are going to work for everyone, but it might at least generate some productive thoughts for some of you out there. First, you obviously want to find something you're interested in doing.
No shit, Sherlock.
But before you start thinking about all the problems and obstacles, I want you to think about what you would want to do if money and resources were a non-issue. That might seem like impractical advice, but the purpose of this experiment is to identify what you truly want to do without immediately brushing it off due to obstacles. Think of it like a vision board, if you will. If you can find a way to make that happen, great. If not, then maybe start thinking of some adjacent things that are along those lines that you can still do. Next, you need to be truthful with yourself in how you manage finances. I personally believe in trying to start up a business with little to no debt. This can be achieved through sweat equity if you're going to provide services, or if you're getting into product sales, you can start with a smaller investment at the front end and reinvest it to grow the business bigger. If you struggle managing finances or have the ADHD tendency to jump from project to project, this is especially valuable advice. A lot of people have made the mistake of going big in the beginning of a business idea and then not seeing it through, leaving them with nothing to show for it but a big pile of debt. That's not the goal, and it should be avoided at all costs, in my humble opinion. No one wants to break even because obviously you want to make a profit, but breaking even is better than being majorly in the red. However, if you've been successful and responsible with finances in the past and you know you can maybe invest a little more in the front end, then go for it. but it's important to be honest with yourself about this one aspect of business startup to avoid disaster. Past actions dictate the future, and if you have not been or are not currently good with finances, you won't suddenly change by starting a business. Thirdly, I would say just jump in. You might be jumping in small, but at least you're moving forward. Don't get so hung up on the bells and whistles. And look, I admit I'm being a little bit hypocritical here because I myself felt like I had to have a logo, a clever name, and a website before I could start this channel. However, I can tell you it added to the overwhelm of getting my first video out there and was ultimately unnecessary. Oftentimes, we are our own worst enemy with the small details. As someone at Nike once said, just do it. This doesn't mean running in with your eyes closed, but at some point, you just have to start. I would also say rely on programs or even other people to help you, and don't try to do everything yourself. You can use sites like 99 Designs to help with creating a logo, or other websites like Canva, Fiverr, or Placeit. Those websites have a lot of useful stuff for promotional material, templates, and even videos that you can customize. And find ways to outsource or eliminate your deficits, like social communication and interaction, for example, so that you can focus on what you're good at. We live in a world of much more accessible AI and automation tools, so if you can use any of those things to help you out in any burdensome area, do it. You can use AI to generate email responses, pictures, slogans, or descriptive content for your website. The tools are there. Use them as a base and then tweak them to fit your needs. If you're like me and you struggle with perfectionism, do your best to live by the good enough motto to make progress, not perfection. The truth of the matter is, for those of us who struggle with perfectionism, nothing is ever perfect. You could find ways to tweak something until the day you die. Dr. Nicole Pickering states that cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work for all neurodivergents, so if this is you, you may have to find other ways to keep the good enough concept at the forefront of your mind. Maybe put it on a sticky note where you'll see it in your office or on a piece of jewelry that you constantly wear. But whatever you do, find some way to keep moving forward with things that are good enough. And that also means trying not to compare yourself to others. Remember, there's only one you. Even if you're offering something that a lot of other people have to offer, they will never do things the exact same as you. As neurodivergents, we can have a lot of dedication and commitment, so putting on your blinders to focus on your own path can reinforce this strength. Obviously, you need to be able to pivot and take advice if you want your business to succeed, but what I'm talking about here is getting rid of those bad feelings of being less than someone else, and remember, you are simply different and have different things to offer. And finally, because I'm somewhat of a finance nerd, one of the best pieces of financial advice I have to offer is saving money for tax time once your business gets off the ground and you start generating income. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised by how many people mess this up. A lot of what I'm about to say could be viewed as being geared more towards my friends here in the States, but really this is practical advice for anyone. So I'll tell you what I did in my business to accomplish this. I only ever took 65% of my earnings as a payout and left the other 35% as a reserve for tax time. Basically, I had two bank accounts, one for business and one for personal. I would deduct expenses before I paid myself anything. So if a client paid me $200, but I had to buy a $100 printer, that meant I had $100 left to pay myself out on. I would transfer $65 of that $100 into my personal account, leaving the remaining $35 in my business account. That way, when tax time came, if I were in the 15% tax bracket, let's say, I would have more than enough in my business account to pay for taxes. And whatever was left over was like a nice little tax refund that I could use to reinvest in the business or do something fun with. So, whereas most business owners I knew were trying to figure out how to pay the tax man a giant sum of money at the end of the year, I was actually enjoying a quote-unquote refund. Having this kind of self-control is easier to do on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to having one big mountain of tax debt at the end of the year that you can't afford to pay. So, It's important to keep track of your expenses. As a gift to all of my viewers, I put some free resources on my website that you can download to help you track and categorize your expenses. One is an Excel spreadsheet that allows you to track your income and expenses. Select which category it falls under in a drop-down menu, IDs for receipt tracking, and a totals column at the end of the spreadsheet that automatically calculates credits, debits, tax withholding, and what you can take out for yourself. This is currently set at my 35% reserve strategy, but of course you can edit this to fit your needs. The second document is a PDF guide to help you figure out what category an expense might fall under if you're unsure. These documents are definitely for businesses in the States, so I am sorry to all of my non-US friends out there. I promise I'm not trying to leave you out, but obviously I just can't speak to how things are run in other countries. But you could still go and check these tools out if you wanted to see if they give you any ideas for keeping track of expenses in your own way. With all of that said, if you go to my website to download these tools, please remember they are not meant to be a replacement for professional tax advice. I swear, if any of you run around telling people I was your CPA, I will be very angry. But they've worked for me, and I did work really hard on them, so I've included a donation button that you're welcome to use if you find these tools helpful. You're not obligated to, of course. All right, so for those of you who are still here with me after all that boring business talk, you get rewarded with story time. Join me as we venture down my entertaining timeline of business startups. As many of you know by now, I started out with low-cost manufacturing sales in the rock department when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I can't say the product was overly innovative, but let me tell you, my profit margins were off the charts. I would also draw pictures and sell them at almost every family gathering for like 5 or 10 cents, depending on the quality and effort invested, of course. Now, my demographic reach wasn't very good with this one. It was basically only like my mom, maybe an aunt and uncle, and once in a while my grandparents. Unfortunately, my cousins were too young to be a part of my customer base, and the adults had already been overly saturated with my products because it was the same people attending my art galleries over and over again. But still, I would diligently work on my art pieces, set them out on the table, and wait for one of the 6 adults in attendance to buy something from me. After this, I moved up to a lemonade stand with my cousin. At this point, I had realized the benefit of expanding my customer base by offering more product options. My lemonade stand included not only lemonade, but also bite-sized candy bars that I purchased in bulk to sell for a profit. In elementary school, I made and sold friendship bracelets. But it's at this point in the timeline that I unfortunately got into some ethically questionable business practices that would have had PETA outraged. I'm going to go ahead and share this story anyway in the hopes that it will be a cautionary tale against morally problematic business practices. In about the 3rd or 4th grade, I captured and sold ladybugs. Look, I'm not proud of it, okay? But these are the stories. I would put them in tiny baby food jars and poked holes in the top and sold them in their enclosures for 25 cents each. I would then make accessories for the ladybugs that my fellow students could purchase to add to their enclosures. They were things like tiny swings, ladders, or slides, because what ladybug doesn't want to have their own private jungle gym to play on? And honestly, it became a pretty big hit on the playground. I got to the point of having to hire my best friends to assist with this growing business, but to add to the dubious nature of this dark chapter in my entrepreneurial history, I'm pretty sure I wasn't even paying them minimum wage. I can at least proudly say I never digressed into starting any ladybug fighting rings. In middle school, I did a spin-off of my lemonade stand days and sold candy bars outside my bedroom window. I had a bell rigged to my ceiling tied to a string that I had draped outside the window. So whenever one of the neighborhood kids wanted to buy some candy, they would come to my window and ring the bell. I can't make this crap up. Around this time, I also made and sold tiny stationery, like I was a miniature Hallmark store or something. This one was actually kind of a big hit around the neighborhood with the kids and their parents. The envelope flaps worked like real envelopes, and I even made tiny stamps that you could lick and stick to the tiny little envelopes as well. The stationery came in packs of 5, and I had order forms to allow my customers to tell me what design they wanted on their stationery. Moving into my 20s, I started selling rice jewelry. For those of you who don't know what that is, rice jewelry is kind of a nostalgic trend from the 90s where someone could write your name on a grain of rice and place it in a small glass vial that you could wear as a necklace or earrings or like on a keychain. It was suspended in clear or colored oil, and you could also add accessories like glitter or a tiny flower to the vial. I was even able to draw little pictures on the grains of rice like flowers or astrology signs. I only did this on the side at conventions or fairs in the beginning, but then I moved on to having an actual store in the mall. However, I bit off more than I could chew when I did this because I was working an actual full-time office job at the same time as well. I did have an employee that would run it from 9 to 5 during the weekdays, but I had to run it in the evenings and on the weekends. I would basically rush from my office job to take over on the weekdays and had no more free weekends. I was basically working 14-hour days, 7 days a week for a while. I wound up terminating my lease with the mall and ended up moving this side hustle online for a couple of years, where it belonged. Question: do you guys think I should bring these back? Would you buy them if I put them on my website? Anyway, I feel like I might be missing a few things, but I'll wrap up my timeline, which brings us to my last and most legitimate business of all that I ran for over a decade. I won't get too much into the details about that one, but I basically worked in the field of assisted reproduction, helping couples who were struggling with infertility. I hired several part-time employees and had 3 full-time employees at various stages throughout that time. I attended professional conferences, had to get licensing in various states, and I worked with a lot of professionals in the legal, medical, and mental health fields. While I did this...
You're not done yet?
I also owned and operated 3 short-term rentals, as well as a Turo rental car. If you're not picking up on a theme yet, it's that I tend to bite off more than I can chew with these endeavors. Managing all 4 of those things with my full-time job is part of what contributed to my infamous meltdown, which eventually led me to selling that business. And I suppose you could say STRs and a Turo rental car don't quite fit into my entrepreneurial endeavors because I didn't invent those businesses. Like, I don't own VRBO because if I did, I probably wouldn't be here right now. But it does still fall under that risk assumption and business ownership category since I am technically an independent contractor. I still manage my short-term rentals but have mostly scaled back. And now I'm here making YouTube videos for y'all for the low price of $0. And hopefully they brought at least a little bit of value or joy to your lives because that's why I'm here. I guess you could say entrepreneurialism has been my special interest that has stuck with me throughout my life. My psychologist actually pointed this out to me in our interview. I had never really viewed it that way before because each venture looked a little bit different, but I think she was right because the underlying principle of that interest was always the same: entrepreneurship. So I'll end it there. I hope this has provided some tangible or useful advice. If not, then hopefully at least you got a few laughs in during story time. If you have any stories about starting up your own business as an entrepreneur, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to put something in the comments to help me in the YouTube algorithm, but don't know what to say, just throw a ladybug emoji in there. We can allow all the ladybug emojis in the comments section to serve as a reminder that capturing and selling ladybugs is unethical. Bye for now. Mwah. All the ladybugs at the ladybug picnic. Yeah.